Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, audiophiles and music lovers. Today I'll be reviewing the KEF LSX II LT speakers. I hope you enjoy this. All right, let's start with this. In a word, wow. Yep, because these speakers are simply wonderful, at least when you consider them in the right context. Some of that context is that they cost $9.99 per pair. And they aren't just speakers, but include amplifiers and a music streamer. So in plain English, all you need to use these is a Qobuz or Tidal or Spotify or Amazon Music or Deezer subscription, and a Wi-Fi or wired network connection. There is an HDMI ARC connection, so you can also use these with your TV. In my case, I plugged the speakers into AC power, connected the right speaker to the left via a supplied USB cable, and linked the speakers to my Wi-Fi. I opened up the KEF Connect app, found Qobuz in there, and started playing from my Qobuz library. One more bit of context. I chose to use the LSX2s initially as desktop speakers. I'll cover the sound in a full room mode in a bit. All right, we're here to talk about sound quality, so let's do that. By desktop mode, I mean, of course, placement on a desktop. I put the LSX2 LTs right and left of my computer monitor. The KEF Connect app has adjustable EQ and phase settings specifically for desktop usage, and I tuned them in expert mode very slightly. With this basic setup, the LSX2 rather quickly earned a full wow rating. Since this rating system is new, maybe I'll have to dish out 2 wows and 3 wows in the future, but for now you get the idea. I was impressed. So let's talk about why. Well, the big thing that leads to a wow is the way the LSXs place an image in desktop mode. The sound is mostly spread between and above and behind the speakers. The sense of the music just being there in space, as with live music, is palpable and impressive. But that's not all. Next, we come to dynamics. The LSX in desktop mode is a punchy and lively speaker. This wouldn't be so valuable if the LSX couldn't deliver excellent instrumental separation so that the dynamics don't get blurry or fuzzy or mushy, as with many budget systems. Timing in good stereo is really important. But with the LSX, dynamics are cleanly defined on both the leading and trailing edge, and each musician stands clearly in the mix. That's what you want. Related to this, the LSX in desktop mode will play plenty loud if you have any sense about you. They're rated at 102 dB max output at 1 meter, and you'll be 1 meter or less away from them in desktop mode. I use 78 dB average as a reference level that I think is ample, realistic, and sane. So these speakers have plenty of headroom for most applications. You want some dynamic range in there. Having 100 watts per channel in the LSXs doesn't hurt either. The LSX on the desktop is quite well balanced. I'm talking about frequency balance here. Octave to octave balance, which has a big impact on whether instruments sound right or realistic, and whether there seems to be a veil or not over some of the frequency bands, is very good. These things don't sound veil, and musical instruments sound pretty accurate and like themselves. Although the bass is punchy and goes deep enough to work on a lot of music, I'd say 60 hertz is where things start to fall off, though you can adjust this a bit in the app. Those who focus on EDM or hip hop might want a sub. But given how hard it is to make subs work well, I was pleased with the LSX only approach on the desktop, which also saves money, obviously. In my book, no sub is better than a bad sub implementation. You're welcome to disagree. And I note that KEF makes several subwoofers that can be integrated wirelessly. But I really think you should try the LSX alone before opting for a sub, because they may surprise you. Upper mid-range is full and clear, though lovers of warmth and softness might look elsewhere. Treble is extended, but perhaps very slightly rough in the upper mid-range to treble transition region. This is more noticeable when there are recording or digital data rate issues. I listen mainly with Qobuz streaming at the highest res available. Now, we should remember that when sitting on a desk, your ear is perhaps 20 degrees off axis vertically, which might create some unevenness, and this is perhaps why KEF offers the P2 stands, they're optional, which angle the speakers up by 10 degrees. I've used these stands before when reviewing the original LSX, and I thought they helped. It's wise to mention at this point that with a desktop setup, you are listening in the near field. That means more of what you hear is direct sound from the speakers, and less of what you hear are reflections from the room. You also have to consider that desktop listening using a video monitor, as I set the LSX LTs up, creates some early reflections. I don't think this is as big a thing as you might expect because the likely geometry means the monitor reflections are perhaps 120 degrees off axis, where output in the mid to high frequencies is reduced. And, importantly, KEF is famous for their work on making off-axis response smooth, which probably helps with this.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of the Absolute Sound. I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the Absolute Sound magazine, which we've been publishing for over 50 years. For $20 per year in print, or $10 per year in digital magazine format, you get 11 issues, each with around 100 pages of exclusive equipment reviews, music reviews, and buyer's guides. You also get early access to our 3 awards issues: Editor's Choice, Products of the Year, and Golden Ear. To subscribe, enter this URL in your browser or go to theabsolutesound.com and click on the subscribe button. Thanks, and now back to the show.
For my listening, another important phenomenon is that near-field listening enhances your sense of instrumental articulation if the speakers are good. And it reduces the sense of the sound space that you are listening in, which can be helpful in untreated rooms. What's perhaps surprising given this comment, or perplexing, depending on your point of view, is that the near-field listening doesn't ruin the sense of imaging or sound staging, where musicians are in terms of their left to right and front to back positioning. It may actually be beneficial. And that's because the data about sound staging is on the recording. It isn't created by reflections in the room. Think about that for a minute. And remember that the imaging of the LSX II LT is its signature quality. These things really work in this domain. Let's talk about some music so I'm clear on what I heard with the LSX II LT. On Taylor Swift's Tortured Poets department, the soundstage extends well behind the speakers and above them. Now, with the LSXs on the desktop, I'm 2.5 feet from the speakers, and the speakers are 3 feet apart. That's about a third of the distance from the listener to the speakers that we have when we test traditional systems in our small room. And the speakers are proportionately farther apart by a bit on the desktop. The angle is a little bit bigger. But basically, there's a similar geometry to what we use with much bigger, fancier systems that image quite well. The phantom image, which again is created by data on the recording, is somewhat closer to the listener with the LSXs, but it sounds surprisingly like a smaller but not small version of what we are used to with our reference system. The big thing is how much the image is detached from the speakers. It sounds like a desktop concert. It's almost eerie until you get used to it, and then you love it. Getting back to Taylor Swift, the bass is punchy and weighty, which, when combined with the clarity of the different musicians, helps you really get into the songs. I heard similar delivery on Ivor's Slower. There, I found solid mid-bass with good definition, and the instruments were well spot-lit. That means you can hear them as if they were standing alone in their own space, which is what would happen on stage. Also, the image was just so much bigger than these tiny speakers that you almost can't help but wonder what is going on. Nice. Santana's Abraxas, a much earlier recording from 1970, is lively and punchy too. The image is excellent, though smaller than on the modern recordings just mentioned. Switching to Bach and the Art of the Fugue, played by the Quartetto Casals, I noticed that the imaging, spread, and depth was impressive, and each quartet member was superbly delineated. The strong upper-mid balance might not be to everyone's taste, of course. In concert terms, I would say it's more row D than row M. I was so enthralled by the imaging that I tried the LSX2 LTs on desktop stands that raised the tweeters to about ear height. This made the image height a bit higher, but also made the speaker positions somewhat more noticeable and made the image seem a little smaller. Also, I thought the bass punchiness was very slightly reduced. Overall, I wouldn't rate this as a net improvement or a step backwards, it's just a difference. Still, if you can make it work with a clutter on your desk, I think no stand is fine, and the P2 stand, which KEF sells, appears to be possibly the sweet spot, perhaps unsurprisingly. Okay, let's move our thinking off the desktop and into the room, just in case that's your application. Now let's get to how the LSX2 LTs sound when you are at a listening distance of 6 feet from the speakers, which is where you might be in a small-ish room. Most of the qualities I described above hold true in this application. Surprisingly, the nice mid-bass balance seems to be preserved. Of course, your room shape and speaker positioning will affect this, but I was almost amazed at the balance I achieved with minimal setup effort. The imaging is less stunning than on the desktop, but it's still pretty good. The main thing is that the soundstage still stretches between the speakers, but it seems smaller than you might achieve with larger speakers. That's an unfair comparison in some ways, of course. The octave-to-octave balance and transparency in full room mode are good, but will not challenge the better 5K to 10K speakers. No kidding, you might say. And I would concur and add that these speakers lack so much time smear, which is a good thing to lack, and are so well balanced that you naturally start to think about them as if they were 3 times or more their price. I had no problem achieving satisfyingly loud levels in a small room, but a 4.5-inch woofer isn't going to deliver big bass at 90 dB in a living room. If loudness is a key criterion for you, look elsewhere or plan on using a sub. All right, let's talk about using the LSX2 LTs with movies. Their total output capability, especially in the bass, might be an issue for some movie lovers if high volume is part of movie watching for you. Remember, there's an HDMI ARC input, so they're easily connected to your TV. I assume for this high volume, low frequency application, you'd want a sub, which will place less strain on the main LSX driver. And as a result, maybe they'll do the trick. I did not have a KEF subwoofer to use with these, so I used the LSX with no sub on soundtracks and found that their clarity and balance were refreshing for dialogue-driven films and for movies that feature carefully selected music from relevant time periods or places. Let's do a summary. I want to say my reference reviewing system costs about $100,000, maybe a little bit more. And each year, I listen to over 100 different systems ranging in price from $300 on one end to about $3 million on the high end. Now, generally speaking, as you go up in price, you pick up some qualities that you simply don't find at lower price levels. Bass, for example, deep bass is hard. Dynamics are hard. Deep bass with big dynamics is really hard. Low noise is hard. Spatial reproduction is hard. Some of these systems, some of the expensive systems, are very impressive and quite engaging. What I think KEF shows with the LSX2 is if you drop some of the requirements about 30 Hz bass and 110 dB output capability and extreme linearity and super low noise, things that are wonderful but maybe not essential, you can build an extremely musical audio system for under $1,000. Or, in a word, wow. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the KEF LSX II LT speaker system. If you have, we invite you to join us by subscribing to our weekly newsletters. They're free. Also, we'd love it if you would join us by subscribing to the Absolute Sound magazine. We've been publishing it for over 50 years, and it has some of our flagship material about flagship systems. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.